Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at maxfuture.com. Today is Friday, July 22nd. And wow, there's a lot of Apple news. This is the Apple Podcast by maxfuture.com. So let's discuss it on this really hot Friday in the summer in July. So let's get to the big news this week. Okay, so there's a lot of big news this week. Big news this week for Apple. I think the three biggest things are Apple announced its third quarter financial results, which were just unbelievable. The next day, Apple came out with the release of Lion finally as a download. And also, Apple announced the same day updates to the MacBook Airs, the Mac Mini, and the Apple Display. So let's get to it. Let's discuss the financial results. Disclaimer, I am an Apple stockholder. Disclaimer, I'm a Google stockholder. I think those are the two big tech companies I have stock in. Not enough to, make a difference in my Apple coverage, because I've always been an Apple customer and fan going back for a long time before I had stock. So what were the results? Well, here's the interesting thing. Apple had its biggest financial quarter, and it wasn't even a holiday quarter. I mean, this is the quarter ends in June 30th, 2011. So the big, if you go to Apple's press release, Apple says that, among other things, well, let's just talk the bottom line numbers. It recorded revenue of $28.57 billion. And get this is the part that's really stellar. Revenue is, just remember, if some of you don't really understand financial stuff, revenue is just how much money you brought in selling stuff. So if you're a grocer, it's what people paid at the cash register in the quarter, right? If they're taking, goods off the shelves and buying them, what you ring up is revenue. But guess what, folks? You could have great revenue, but who cares if you're not making profit? Profit is what you save after you bring in revenue and deduct your costs. Because anybody, even the most simple person running a lemonade stand, a kid running a lemonade stand understands he's got to buy the lemonade, he's got to buy the lemon to buy the sugar, make the lemonade, and any money he brings in there that's above what he paid for the lemon, for the sugar, is profit. So get this, Apple's profit in a 3-month period was, I think, its greatest profit ever, $7.31 billion in profit. That's just unbelievable. That's stunning stuff. To give you a comparison, what Wall Street does, or what companies that are traded on Wall Street do, when they come out with their financial results, they'll compare it to the exact same time period the year before, because it's not really fair. If you want to see how you're doing as a business, you'd compare it to the same period last year ending in June. You wouldn't compare it to the Christmas time, because selling is seasonal, right? So Christmas might be a bigger quarter. So compared to last year for the same quarter, Apple's profit was $3.25 billion. So think about that. In 1 year, Apple doubled its profit in the same quarter. In other words, for the same third quarter, this year Apple made $7.31 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars, and last year it made $3.25 billion in the same quarter. So that's just a tremendous increase. Steve Jobs has a quote in the press release. He says, "We're thrilled to deliver our best quarter ever, with revenue up 82% and profits up 125%. He goes on to say, quote, "Right now we're very focused and excited about bringing iOS 5 and iCloud to our users this fall." So, it's pretty amazing, and the stock reacted, pretty dramatically. Now, the way it works on Wall Street and with public companies is the announcement came on July 19th after trading closed at 4 p.m. So Apple came out with the announcement after trading, and the stock in the aftermarket of trading zoomed up. It was trading around $370, $75 before the announcement came out, and in the aftermarket it got as high as $400 a share. And you know, it's just fantastic. And I don't, you know, how can Apple keep growing? How can it keep growing? Well, it is growing, and let's talk about some of the results. Now, to give you a sense of how tremendous this growth was, or how Apple has grown its revenue and its business, there's actually a great chart by Asymco, A-S-Y-M-C-O, that TechCrunch published on its website, but it's really Asymco's chart. And basically it shows the revenue growth at Apple, quarterly sales by quarter, going back to 2005, the fourth quarter. So if you're looking at this chart with me on the video, basically back in 2005, that's not that long ago, right? That's like 6 years ago. In the fourth quarter of 2005, Apple had revenue in the quarter of $5 billion. And what this chart shows is that more than half of that, or about half of that revenue, came from iPod sales. And what else? And then Mac sales, some software sales, and some music sales. So the red and the blue here and some yellow, back then, that's what really the $5 billion in sales. But look, over time, that grows, and then in 2008, it really starts to increase. So by the fourth quarter of 2008, that's 3 years later, Apple's revenue is like about $12 billion for the quarter. So it goes from $5 billion to $12 billion. And really there is some growth in the Mac. The iPod sales are actually not growing. They spike in the fourth quarter. That's because at Christmas time, people are buying a lot of iPods. But the real growth that starts happening in 2008, that gray area in this chart, is the iPhone. The iPhone starts having substantial sales. But then let's jump forward. So that's the fourth quarter. That's the fourth quarter of 2008. It's around $12 billion. Then you go to the fourth quarter of 2009. It's $15 billion. Okay, now it gets really interesting, because now, then you go to the fourth quarter of 2010. It breaks $25 billion, and now you're pushing almost $30 billion. So holy cow. So basically in the 6-year period, the quarterly revenue has gone up from $5 billion to almost $30 billion. So almost a 6-time increase. But look here, see this gray stuff? That big spike in recent years into the revenue is the iPhone. The iPhone, particularly in the last few quarters, is really fueling the growth. On top of that, we see this light blue, which is the iPad. So the iPad is adding a lot to the revenue. So this is pretty amazing. You know, the central, Apple's getting most of its revenue now from iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch sales. And the Mac is growing, and so the Mac is still a substantial part of the revenue, but the really big revenue, more than 50%, maybe as much as 60, 70%, comes from the iPad and the iPhone. So it's pretty amazing. Now, in this TechCrunch story, which really celebrates this blowout, they quote Idealab's Bill Gross, who asks, quote, "Has there ever been a company in history that is this big, which has grown by this big of a percentage in only 1 year?" And that is amazing. In 1 year, it really has just grown tremendously. And it's because I think the iPad plus the iPhone 4, as Apple refines the iPhone, it's just selling like hotcakes. But remember, the iPhone is expanding into new markets, into China, into Asia, all the rest of Asia, into Africa, into Europe, and Verizon in the United States. So a lot of that growth is coming from there. Now, on July 19th, after Apple released its earnings results for the quarter, it also did what's known as an analyst conference call, where it held a conference call, and you can download the conference call on iTunes and listen to it. And it's kind of interesting because various Apple executives discuss the results, and they give guidance to financial analysts at what it means. And it gives you a peek into Apple and the results. It gives you more information than what's in the financial disclosures. And MG Siegler, who I like to follow and read a lot of his stuff on TechCrunch, did a good job just quickly summarizing what was said on the conference call. And there's some interesting tidbits there. So let me just keep, looking at his webpage. I'll just tell you some of the tidbits and what I think of them. Interestingly, Apple sold more than twice as many iPads as Macs last quarter. So that's pretty amazing because the iPad wasn't around until 2010, and now it's selling twice as many iPads in a quarter as Macs. Because in a way, the iPad is a computer, and it's a very mobile computer, and it's a cheap computer. You can get it as cheap as $500 or as expensive as $850. And think about the Mac. I mean, the Mac, okay, maybe you can get a Mac Mini for $500 or $600, but the MacBook Pros or the MacBook Airs start around $1,000, and they go up to $2,000. And the iPad is much more portable. Now, in this call, I think it was either Peter Cook or Oppenheimer said that the Mac growth was good, but the iPad business is somewhat cannibalizing the Mac sales. What does that mean, cannibalizing the Mac sales? Well, what that means is that some people who might be inclined to buy a new Mac are not buying a new Mac and instead are buying an iPad. And that makes sense. There's a lot of people who are looking for simplicity in their life. They want to use a simple device to browse the internet, to look at websites, to play games, to watch videos. And the iPad is, for some people, a better device than a MacBook Pro, a MacBook Air, an iMac, and certainly a Mac Pro. Now, what they also said was that the cannibalization of the Mac is actually the cannibalization of Windows computers, PCs, by the iPad is even greater. What that means is a lot of people, instead of buying a new PC, are buying an iPad. So that's an interesting comment. Other interesting tidbits. The iPad is now available in 64 countries around the world. And Apple sold every iPad they could make in the last quarter. So the demand for iPads is outstripping the supply. Let's see. Other interesting news. The iTunes revenue is up 36% year over year. So iTunes is music and video sold on iTunes. So that business is still going well. Now, iPods, which came out for the first time in October 2001, they're falling fast. So they're down 20% year to year. Now, why are they falling? I think they're falling because their function is being replaced by the iPhone and the iPad. The iPhone and the iPad can play the exact same type of music and have a better, player for music than the iPod. And so I think a lot of people are not buying a new iPod, they're buying an iPhone or they're buying an iPad. And if you have an iPhone and an iPad, really, why do you need an iPod? So that's why I think the iPod sales are going down. Other interesting news, there are now 327 Apple stores around the world, and there have been 73 million people who visited the Apple stores in the last quarter. So in a 3-month period, 73 million people went there. That's pretty amazing. Okay, now let me talk to you about something that's truly stunning. Apple, it saves up its profits, right? I mean, it can use its profits, for expenses, for capital outlays, but like most companies, Apple has somewhat of a piggy bank somewhere. And the piggy bank is comprised of cash, short-term securities, and maybe longer term securities. So this combination, let's call it Apple's piggy bank, has grown now because Apple made over $7 billion in profit this quarter. Apple's piggy bank, its piggy bank is $76.2 billion, again with the B. This is crazy. Crazy. I don't think there's any company in the world that has a piggy bank that's equal to $76.2 billion. And a lot of people are wondering, like, what is Apple going to do with that? I mean, obviously, Apple uses cash here and there to buy companies, but $76 billion is an enormous amount of money. To give you a sense of how enormous it is, it's greater than all of Goldman Sachs. You know, Goldman Sachs, the famous investment bank on Wall Street. Well, Goldman Sachs' market capitalization is less than Apple's piggy bank. So Apple could buy Goldman Sachs and still have another $10 billion in the piggy bank. So that's pretty amazing. Other interesting news, Apple basically emphasized that its expansion in China is going to be important. And there's speculation that Apple's going to sign a deal with with China's biggest telephone carrier. Here's another tidbit that's amazing. Apple's Mac business continues to grow, and its growth, this is the growth of the sale of the Macintoshes, has grown greater every quarter than the growth in the PC industry, the PC industry being those computers with Windows computers on them, Windows operating system. So for 21 consecutive quarters, that means for more than 5 years in one quarter, every quarter, the growth of Apple Macintoshes has been greater than the growth of PCs. And I think that totally makes sense. Think about why that's happening. I've been a Mac owner at home for, a very long time. And at work, I've always been stuck using a Windows computer. And Macs were seen as sort of this exotic, weird computer that didn't run the programs that Windows computers ran. And people were afraid to get a Mac. They would say, hey, can it run Microsoft Office on it? Or can it run my programs? But what's happening now is, obviously, the iPhone, the iPod, the iPad are huge hits. So people are being exposed to Apple. And frankly, the iOS devices work better with Macintoshes than they do with Windows computer. Yes, they can interact with a Windows computer that is running iTunes, but the iTunes on a Mac is better than the iTunes on a Windows computer. So a lot of people are first being exposed to iPod, to iPhone, to iPad, to iPod Touch, and now they're going out and getting a Mac. So I think that's what's going on. Here's another interesting tidbit. Tim Cook noted that last quarter, Apple sold more iPads to schools in the kindergarten through 12th grade category than Macintoshes. Now, Macintoshes always have been something that schools love, but schools apparently are embracing iPads, and that totally makes sense because I think the maintenance for iPads is much easier. There's not much to do. They either work or they don't. There's not a whole file system. There's no viruses, and they're light and they can be handed out almost like books. So, and they're cheaper than Macs. You can get them for $500 or up to $800. So I think schools are just seeing the iPads as better devices for students than Macintoshes. Other interesting news is that Cook was asked about different price points for the iPhone. And why was he asked that? Because the iPhone's biggest competitor are the Android devices. Now, these are smartphones that run an operating system developed by Google that Google gives away for free. And I think the reason so many Android devices are being sold is because there's a lot of them that are being sold cheaply because there's no cost to the operating system. I've seen ads in the paper where you can get an Android device for as little as a penny with, signing up with a contract with some carrier in the United States. So I think it's, for Apple to expand having a lot of customers, it has to offer a cheap iPhone. And the currently cheap iPhone is the last generation iPhone, the 3GS, which Apple has made available through carriers with a contract for $49. So Tim Cook emphasized that that's the cheapest price point for the iPhone, and there's a lot of speculation that there's going to be other cheaper iPhones in the future. Most likely when the iPhone 5 comes out, the iPhone 4 will be the cheaper version. TechCrunch also notes that there was a question at the end. Someone asked, when will we see more video content on iTunes? And Oppenheimer from Apple said, quote, to look for more content later this year, end quote. So obviously Apple is going to try to make more deals to bring more content to iTunes, more video, more TV. I mean, I've said this before. I think Apple needs to get major sports. It already has Major League Baseball and basketball on iTunes, but I'd like to see, or actually the Apple TV has it, I'd like to see NFL. If they can get an NFL deal through either the Apple TV or the iTunes, that would be stellar. NFL, hockey. If they can get the 4 major sports there, I'm going to cut my cord, not watch cable, and just stream content from the internet, mainly from Apple. Okay, so the second big piece of news was that the next day, well, actually during the call on the 19th, I think Tim Cook announced that Apple would be releasing Lion the next day. Now, what is Lion? Lion is the operating system for the Macintosh, the new one, the latest one. And it had been in beta, and Apple last fall announced that it was going to be somewhat revolutionary and coming in the summer of 2011. And on July 20th, Apple released Lion. And the way Apple released Lion, it did a new thing that it has never done before with an operating system from Apple. Instead of shipping DVDs, Apple decided Lion is not going to be shipped by DVD. In fact, major software from Apple is no longer going to be using the DVD. The DVD, folks, is dead because it's no longer going to be a delivery for software, and more we're seeing that movies, which typically is what DVDs were for, are no longer being delivered by DVD. They're being delivered by streaming. Netflix streams it, Apple streams it or downloads it, and a lot of other services. So how did you get Lion? Well, Lion came out Wednesday morning, the 20th, and it costs a mere $29. And I had been playing around the beta for months, so I'm kind of used to Lion because I joined the developers program for $99 and got access to the beta. The beta meaning it's not the final version. And so what you do is you go to the Mac App Store. So you have to have the Mac App Store, which means you have to have Snow Leopard running on your Mac and a version of Snow Leopard that can download and use the Mac App Store, because you buy Lion through the Mac App Store. Now later, I think in August, Apple is going to sell OS X Lion for people who don't have Snow Leopard not on a DVD, but on a USB stick, and I believe for $69. So if you don't want to download it through the Mac App Store, let's say you have a later version of the Mac OS, let's say you just have Leopard, not Snow Leopard, you might want to wait till August to get the USB stick. Now here's the other thing. Lion will only run on 64-bit processors. So I think Lion is a great upgrade because one big key feature of Lion is that it is really heavily into 64-bit. 64-bit in computer language is the how the processor crunches data. And remember, I'm a layperson. I'm not a computer developer or a scientist or anything like that. But basically, remember how computers run. Computers run on a binary method, which is that all information on a computer is reduced to a 0 or a 1. In other words, like we operate our language on letters, 26 letters. Well, a computer is actually very simple. It sees the whole world in zeros and ones and reduces everything to zeros and ones. And the early days of computing, how many zeros and ones or bits it could analyze at any instance was something that was important. So in the beginning, personal computers, I think, were 8-bit. That means 8 zeros and ones combinations or pairs could be analyzed. And then they went to 16-bit, and then they went to 32-bit. And for the longest time, Windows computers and Macintoshes have been really running software and analyzing them at 32-bit. And in the last few years, the processors have moved up, and they can crunch at 64-bit. And you may say big deal, but it is a big deal because 64-bit isn't just a couple of multiplications times more than 8 or 4 or 6. It's actually a geometric progression. So when you have 64-bit computing, the processor can really crunch data much quicker, much faster, and the performance is greater. The other thing is, when you had smaller bit computers, the amount of RAM that you could use, memory, which is the sort of, the temporary place that you could hold the data, was limited. But 64-bit, it's really not limited. You could cram crazy amounts of RAM into a 64-bit computer. So here's the thing, Lion will not work with any Mac that comes out prior to 2007. So I have an Intel, and it won't work with anything that's running a PowerPC, which was phased out. It was the old processor before Apple went to Intel, and I believe that was phased out in, I want to say 2005, because I got my last iMac in January 2006, and that was, I think, one of the first Intel-based iMacs. So you need a pretty modern Lion if you want to use it. And I recommend getting it. There might be little bugs here and there, but if you have a new computer, a relatively new one, you should get Lion. And you may get Lion because you just bought a brand new computer. There's new MacBook Airs. We'll talk about that before we end the show, but let's talk about what's cool about Lion. Okay, so one new thing in Lion is something called Launchpad. If you go over here, you've got this button, and basically whatever apps you have will now appear sort of like on the iPad or the iPhone. They'll just sort of pop up, and you can scroll through them and just see them as sort of icons sort of laid out. And here's the other cool thing. You can create folders like you do on the iPhone or iPad with Launchpad. So here's what you do. Let's say if you just drag an icon into another icon like that, you can create a folder, and you can title it. I'm going to call it Miscellaneous. And there you go. I've got a folder, and you can drop other things in there. I'm going to drop iKaraoke, and it's a way to clean up your folder structure, because before, the folder structure was kind of unwieldy for everyday people, right? Let's go to apps here. Here's a folder structure, and look at it. I mean, this is the old way of sort of viewing apps. I have 190 apps, and this is how you would hunt for them. So, Launchpad, for people who are really not, techno geeks, but have been using the iPad and the iPhone, they're gonna find Launchpad to be really a helpful way to quickly look at your programs and organize them. So check it out. Now, one interesting little tidbit about Launchpad, you saw that I created a folder called Miscellaneous for the applications, Now what's interesting is when you create that folder in Launchpad, that folder does not then go into the file structure in the traditional file structure, because if you look under My Applications, there's no miscellaneous folder. So that's very interesting, because you could make this really great organization on Launchpad and it doesn't reflect in the folder structure. Just food for thought. Okay, so it's clear that Lion is really designed for the touchpad, and you should really get the Magic Trackpad. I've had it, I guess, for almost a year. I love it, and it really works well with Lion. And I guess in Lion there's like some more trackpad gestures. If we go to more gestures, so basically before, if I just use 4 fingers to go left and right, I'd get like a quick view of the apps that are launched. You can still do that by just pressing, I think, Command Tab. That brings up the you can quickly scroll through the apps that are launched, but you can't do that anymore with 4-finger back and forth. Instead, 4-finger swiping left or right allows you to go between apps that are in full screen mode, and I'll basically show you what that is. Basically every app now, or new app, can take advantage of full screen mode. So if you go to this top corner of any window of any app, if you click that, it will take you to full screen mode, and you won't see the menu bar, you won't see anything on a periphery, you'll just see the app. And this is sort of like the iPad and the iPhone. So full screen mode is a big part of Lion. So you can get out of it usually by pressing the escape key, but on Chrome it's not doing that. Okay, so with the trackpad, you can really get your way around Lion. Here are some of the different things. If you spread with the thumb and 3 fingers, you can show the desktop. You can get the Launchpad with just the thumb and 3 fingers. This is if you go into Preferences, System Preferences, and you go to Trackpad, there are these great videos that show you the gestures and the movements, and you can change them. Like, for example, App Expose. If you swipe down with 4 fingers, the apps that you currently have launched will come up. If you swipe between, you can swipe left or right with 4 fingers between full screen apps. You can swipe between pages with 2 fingers. Now let me show you this. This is really cool. In Lion, when you're in Safari, actually let's go to Safari. Okay, one of the cool things in Safari when you're using the Magic Trackpad is if you've been to different pages and you want to go back, if you use your 2 fingers to go back and forth, it's incredible. This is this animation. Now watch this. If I just swipe it, it goes lickety fast. Look how quickly that's changing. These are just, I'm swiping through prior pages, and I'm just doing this with 2 fingers. Isn't that incredible? Look how quickly that slides. So that's just with Safari. Safari has that built in to work with the touchpad. So that's a very cool feature. Okay, so now if you get Lion and have the trackpad, one thing that might bother you is that they've changed the direction of scrolling. Up to Lion, you've always scrolled as if you were controlling the sliding bars on the side of a window, right? But with Lion, they've changed the direction. So if you go to your preferences for the trackpad, under scroll direction, the natural method, which I had unchecked, was it's as if you're grabbing the page and scrolling down, okay? So if you want to go here, like I'll show you, if I want to go, if I want to read more of this, if I want to go to the bottom of this page of John Syracuse's story, in a new version of Lion, I wouldn't scroll down with my finger. I would scroll up, because what I'm doing is it thinks of it as almost like a piece of paper. I'm pushing the paper up to get to the bottom of it, like you do on the iPad. So, some people hate that. I've been playing around with that for several months. I'm kind of used to it. If you don't like it, you just go to trackpad preferences, uncheck scroll direction natural. Now, other things that I like are for pointing and clicking. I love 3-finger drag. I've been using this before with the trackpad. I highly recommend it. What this means is you can go to a if you want to just hold down this window and move it around, you just go with your pointer there and put 3 fingers down on the trackpad and you move it around. I find that a really great way to control. Now, if you don't do that, there's other ways to do it. Let's see. Scroll. Well, I'm not sure how you would do it. I think you have to press down with the trackpad. So let me uncheck the 3-finger drag, and then for me to for me to move this window around, I have to go to the top of the window, press down on the trackpad, and move around. And it's much easier to just do the 3-finger drag. So I'm gonna do that. So I highly recommend getting a trackpad because Line is really built for that. All right, now let's go to some other cool things. Now, one of the cool things that works with the trackpad is mission control. So mission control, if you look at this video, the default is 4 fingers pushed up, and mission control is sort of like a combination of spaces and I don't know, other things that Apple had in prior operating system. But I kind of like it. So this is what happens. When you go to mission control, I'll do it if you're watching the video. Basically, oh, I know, it used to be like spaces. And basically what you get is you see the different spaces. They're at the top of your screen. There's the dashboard, there's the desktop, desktop 1, desktop 3. And if you go to the right with your cursor, you can create another desktop. So you can create all sorts of blank desktops. So I've created desktop 4 here, and if you go to desktop 4, there's nothing there. It's blank. And just by pushing 4 up, I can see my other desktops. But the beauty of the desktops is you can launch an app in a desktop and it'll be there and you won't see the clutter. So here I put the Hype app, which I previously discussed in desktop 3, and there's no other app open there. But I can go to desktop 2 and I have my, I still have my preferences open and Chrome. But I can go push up again. I go to desktop 2 and I've got Chrome. No, I'm sorry. I'll go to desktop 1 and I have Safari going. And if I press down, I can see all the windows. And I don't know. I just find it handy because by swiping, I find it much easier to swipe than use the mouse because it's much quicker. I go down with 4 fingers and I see what windows I see open on my Safari. And I go up, it closes. I go up some more, and I see the different desktops. So that's really cool. Now, something else that's new is Dashboard. And what Dashboard is, it's your widgets now are on this space that's always there called the dashboard. And I don't know, I don't really like it. It's almost like a bulletin board. It's like you can arrange your different widgets there. I don't know, I don't have a strong feeling about Dashboard. It's there, I don't find it particularly interesting, but it's something there. So, all right, let's talk about let's go back to desktop 2 and let's talk about some other things. Okay, so another really cool feature in Lion that I think might be just a great reason to get it is something called versions. And what versions is is built into the operating system is the ability for apps to have prior versions of files available in the file itself. So you don't have to go hunting around for files. And so any developer can take advantage of versions, but Apple's programs like Pages, which is the word processing program, Keynote, have that. So if you're looking at the video, I've opened up an old Pages file that I have, and that was one that I did, I guess, iPad Podcast 24. I put some stories in there that I wanted to talk about. And the way Pages works is, instead of going into the file structure to look for prior drafts of a document, it's all going to be there in the file, so you don't have to hunt around for numerous versions. So what you do is you go up to the name of the document, and up there in the title bar, if you click on a little arrow, you see this window that says Lock, Duplicate, Revert to Last Open Version, Browse All Versions. Now if you click Browse All Versions, your document window becomes like this Time Machine window. Remember Time Machine? So look, I have these prior drafts, and if you go to the right-hand corner, you can go back in time, and it goes back, and you can see the prior versions. Now, I didn't have a lot of versions here, but basically, versions, just as you make changes to a document every now and then, it saves them, and it stores your prior versions, so you don't have to worry anymore about trying to find old versions. Now, the thing is, if you want to send it, it only sends your latest version, or you could just send a prior draft, but it doesn't send to someone all your prior versions. So this is really a cool feature, and I expect a lot of developers who have any program that generates files to have versions. Okay, so another feature in Lion is, I guess it's both resume and autosave. You never have to worry about saving anything, because Lion is saving any document that you have, and you don't have to save it. It'll just save it. So let's see, at the bottom of this document, I'm just going to write testing, see? And then I'm just going to quit the document, quit it, and it's gone. Now I'm going to launch it again, and you're going to see something interesting here. So I launched Pages again. Let's wait for it to come up. And look. Oh, I guess it didn't save all of it. But well, there's two things. What we see here is resume. When you launch an app after you closed it, it just resumes the windows that it was in. Now, you might not like that. Some people have pointed out, what if you were looking at something you shouldn't be looking at? Somebody else opens the app and then you see it. Well, the way you can control resumes is if you go to System Preferences, and under General, you'll see this checkbox here, Restore Windows when quitting and reopening apps. And if you uncheck that, it won't restore the windows. Now, that just does it universally. What Savings does is it knows to save your whatever is new to an app. Now, what's interesting here is I saved very quickly after typing, so it didn't do it instantaneous. So let's try it again. Testing. I typed it twice, and then testing. And I'll count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to quit Pages. I didn't save. And I'm going to launch Pages again. And let's see. It's all there. So if you just type something new and just immediately close it, it might not save it. But the point of this is you don't have to press the Control Save S button again. It just saves it. So that's another great new feature. Okay, so another reason to get Line is Apple's Mail app has been greatly improved. So in addition to, you can go to widescreen view, 2-column view, and display your emails and your messages side by side, and you can just see great message threads and conversations streamlined in chronological feed. So that's really great. you can also go to 3-column view, which is really neat now. So you can see your email, like if you have multiple emails on the left, then the emails, then the column view. You can also preview all the email without actually open it. The search with an email has gotten much better. You can just start typing, and a recipient's name or a subject line, and it will quickly try to match it. And you see conversations of back and forth email are in a nice little conversation thread. So just one reason to get it is just the Mail app. It's fantastic. Okay, so another incredible feature is something built into the file structure called AirDrop. And the way AirDrop works is, if you're looking at this window, it looks at anything that's nearby on another computer that has Wi-Fi, that has Lion. And it doesn't have to be on a common network. It just has to have Wi-Fi on. So it can just use the ad hoc Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi connection to look for a Mac. So think about it. You don't need to be on a common network of Wi-Fi. You just have to have another Mac. So let's say you have multiple Macs in the house, and you don't have, or let's say you're at a coffee shop, and a friend has a MacBook Air, and you have a MacBook Air running Lion, and you're not on the network. You can just do a secure AirDrop to AirDrop connection. So it's built into the file structure. You would just drag some files in here and be able to share it to that other person through AirDrop. So it's very cool. Now, Line has something else that I haven't been able to really play around with, but Macworld.com details it, and it sounds really powerful. And that's better screen sharing under Lion. So it gives an example. It says that to begin with, it's now possible for you to not only view the display of another Mac, but also share the screen for any account you have access to on that Mac, even when someone else is using it with another account. Now, this sounds pretty complicated. This is what Macworld says. It says, for example, let's say a remote Mac has 2 user accounts, Joe and Jane. Joe is currently working on that Mac in his account. From another Mac, Jane can select that Mac under the shared heading in a Finder window, click Share Screen, and enter her username and password in the resulting dialog box. When she clicks the Connect button, a Select Display window appears. Within this window are 2 options: Ask to share the display and connect to a virtual display. If she clicks Ask to share this display, a message appears on the other Mac indicating that Jane would like to share the screen. If Joe clicks Share Screen, Jane can see what's on Joe's screen as well as control Joe's account. If she clicks Connect to a virtual display, she can choose to view and control any account she has access to on the other account. She can, for example, select the Jane account, enter her password, and her account will launch in the background and on the remote Mac. The only indication Joe will have that this is happening is the appearance of the screen sharing icon in the menu bar. Jane can then work with the Mac remotely while Joe is also using it. Now, this is really crazy stuff. I mean, this is very powerful stuff. I can't even get my mind wrapped around, what this means. It goes on to say, and by the way, this article, really well written, is by the famous Christopher Breen of Macworld. He then goes on to say, additionally, screen sharing now offers you 2 display modes, hardware and virtual display. Hardware is the display mode we're accustomed to, where when you've connected to another Mac via screen sharing, that Mac display image appears on both the Mac as well as on your Mac, he says. But when you choose virtual display, you see the remote Mac's image, but the display of the host Mac switches to the Mac's gray login screen. In order for the person sitting in front of the Mac to regain control of it, he or she must log in with his or her password. This is pretty wild. So he also goes on to say there's a new Observe mode. You can turn that on, and you can see what's happening on the remote Mac, but you can't control it. This could be useful for watching a presentation on another Mac, for example. Finally, he goes on to say screen sharing includes a new toolbar that appears when you're screen sharing in full screen mode. Within it, you can switch between control and observe mode, trigger the fit screen and window command, take a screenshot, and get the contents of the remote Mac's clipboard as well as send the contents. Pretty cool. Very cool. Okay, we can talk more about Lion in future podcasts as I learn more about it. But one of the things I would like to talk about is what else came out on the 20th, which is new hardware. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Because Apple released and announced on the 20th new MacBook Airs, and we've been waiting for them for a long time, as well as a new Mac Mini. So the new MacBook Airs are really much faster. First of all, they have new processors. They have the Intel Core i5 and i7 processors, which Apple says makes the MacBook Airs 2.5 times faster than before. And they also have the Thunderbolt connection, which is this incredibly high-speed connection, which also is very useful in the MacBook Airs, because remember, the MacBook Airs don't have a FireWire connection, but now that they have a Thunderbolt connection, there are like little adapters that you could put on that also give it FireWire capability. But Thunderbolt is, in the end, incredibly faster than any sort of connection. It can go up to 10 gigabytes per second, and it's like having an external PCI Express card. The other thing about the MacBook Airs is this new version has backlit keyboard. One of the things that people were upset about the last version of the MacBook Air is that they didn't have backlit keyboards. They've never had that. And so that's the other good thing. Now, the other good thing is the configurations have changed a bit. You can now get the 11-inch MacBook Air with a 256 gigabyte flash drive. Before, the most you could get in the 11-inch was 128 gigabytes. Now the 11-inch comes in the base model is still $999 for just 64 gigabytes of flash and 2 gigabytes of memory, but for $1,199 you can get 4 gigabytes of memory, a 1.6 gigahertz dual-core i5 processor, and 128 gigabytes flash. Now you can upgrade that for $300. So upgrading to 256 gigabytes of flash is pretty expensive. It makes it $1,499. And you can also upgrade to an i7 processor for $150, and that would bring it to the whopping $1,649. That's the 11-inch. Now the 11-inch weighs something like 2 pounds 2 ounces. And if you look here in this spreadsheet, basically it's 2.38 ounces. It's a little slightly heavier than the one before, and the 13-inch is 2.96 pounds, just under 3 pounds. So the really light one is the 11-inch. And in terms of pixel resolution, the 11-inch has a pretty high native 1366 by 768, while the 13-inch has a pretty high native 1440 by 900. Look, overall, these are blazing fast MacBook Airs. People who've done the tests on them say that they're as fast as the high-end, MacBook Pros from last year. They're very zippy because they have the SSD drives. I'm seriously thinking of getting the 11-inch. I recommend the 11-inch 128 gigabyte model with 128 gigabytes of storage, because that 64 is kind of very little, and 128 gigabytes would give you room. I don't think you need to really upgrade the processor, because the flash memory is blazing fast, makes it really fast. And I would get the 11-inch over the 13-inch. Now, particularly if you already have a Macintosh, like I have an iMac, so I don't really need the bigger screen when I'm at home because I have the iMac, and this is really for mobility. If you don't have another computer, maybe you should get the 13-inch MacBook Air, or why not get the 11-inch MacBook Air and get a second monitor and hook it up through the Thunderbolt. And, what is that second monitor? Well, Apple did announce I don't think it's on their website, new Apple displays that are going to have Thunderbolt connection. So that's going to be really cool. Here we go. Apple's website says, introducing the world's first Thunderbolt display. So with one cable, you're going to be able to connect, I guess, audio and video. And you're going to have a connection that goes at 10 gigabytes per second. So the beauty is you connect your... Oh, it looks like you're going to have to also connect the audio, but you connect your Thunderbolt that also has a MagSafe connection, and through this one cable you connect it to the display, and it looks like you can plug other things like FireWire hard drives to the display, and it'll connect up with your laptop. So this would be a really great way to be hyper portable. Like you could just take your MacBook Air, unplug it, and you don't have to worry about plugging it into all the drives. When you plug into the display, you'll be able to do that. So that's another very cool piece of technology. Something else that's very cool is Apple announced the Mac Mini is updated, and it starts at $599, and you get the Thunderbolt connection, and you get the ability, if you'd like, to configure it with SSD drives, which are blazing fast. So let's look at the prices here. The standard configuration is a 2.3 gigahertz i5 processor with 2 gigabytes, 500 gigabyte hard drive for a mere $599. You can upgrade to a 2.5 gigahertz Core i5 with 4 gigabytes of RAM and 500 gigabyte hard drive, and for $799. Now here's the other big thing: none of these Mac Minis have DVD drives, because there's no longer DVD drives. And let's see, you can upgrade the Mac Mini to be a 2.7 dual core Intel i7. That adds $100. You can put up to 8 gigabytes of RAM. That adds $200. And here's the crazy thing: you can put in a 750 gigabyte ATA drive. Actually, let's see how much. For $750 more, you can put 2 drives in, a regular hard drive and a 256 solid state drive. So you could have a terabyte and put the operating system on the solid state drive, and it would be really fast. And that would bring you to $1,849. And if you throw in the Thunderbolt display, that adds $1,000. That would bring it to $2,848. So it's sort of like an iMac, but really it's a lot more expensive than the iMac. Now the other thing is, the Apple makes a server, a Lion server, with the Mac Mini that has dual 500 gigabyte hard drive, so you have a terabyte for $999. So that's pretty cool. It comes with 4 gigabytes of memory and an i7 processor. So that's kind of a deal for for $1,000. Now you can upgrade the drives all the way up to 256 solid state drives for $1,000. So for $2,000, you could just put 500 gigabytes of SSD drives. That would be blazing fast. So those are the new Macs and hardware devices that Apple has come out with. Some sites have reported the speeds of the new MacBook Air, and they're blazing fast. One site called osxdaily.com had these Geekbench results for the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Air. Look here, the 2011 13-inch MacBook Air running the i5 processor, the 1.7 gigahertz, had a Geekbench score of almost 6,000. Now last year, the 2010 13-inch MacBook Air with the faster, more gigahertz, but running the Core Duo, was under 3,000. It looks like it's like 2,700. So it's more than double the speed. The 13-inch, the 13-inch 2011 1.6 gigahertz i5 was running at 5,000 Geekbench score. So, it's much, much faster. It's still not as fast as my 2010 27-inch quad-core i7 iMac, which had, I think, have a Geekbench score of 9,000. So, it's pretty fast. It shows some handbrake speeds. The 2011 MacBook 2.7 gigahertz Core i7 13-inch has a 54 seconds for handbrake compared to last year having a MacBook Air 13-inch having a score of 264 seconds. So that's almost, ripping something in 54 seconds compared to 265 seconds. So all the accounts are that it's much, much faster. I'm seriously thinking of getting it. Now, Wired magazine also looked at the MacBook Airs, and it says that the 11-inch Air had a Geekbench score of 5,040 compared to 2,000 for last year's model. So even the 11-inch Air is blazing fast. So, I highly recommend anybody looking for a laptop really should be thinking of getting a MacBook Air. All right, thanks for listening to the Apple Podcast by Lex at Mac's Future. I can be found on Google Plus as Lex McFarley, and also check out my blog at maxfuture.com. Also, I've got these video versions of the podcast on YouTube and Blip TV, and also under Apple Things on iTunes. And also check out the iPad podcast that comes out on Sundays. So thanks for listening. You can help out this podcast by giving a nice rating in iTunes. Any positive feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.